Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Liberty Watch. I'm your host, Liberty Man Van, where we talk about current events through the lens of libertarianism. So what does a libertarian believe? We believe in freedom of association, free markets, and private property. We also believe in the non-aggression principle, which says you can't hit people and you can't take their stuff. So basically, we believe in the maximum amount of freedom for people as long as they're not hurting someone else. Now, our show today is going to be about, it's entitled Socialism versus Communism. Now, why would a libertarian be concerned about socialism or communism? And the answer is because these systems tightly control the economic fate of the people. So people are not in control of their economic fate anymore. And so it's antithetical to freedom anytime you have socialism. And I chose the title Socialism versus Communism because there's a lot of confusion about those two terms, and rightfully so, because there's a lot of overlap in the definitions, as we'll see. So let's go ahead and get to a few definitions of socialism first, and then we'll read some definitions of communism, and you'll see there's a whole lot of overlap in the concepts. Socialism. First definition. Any of various economic and political theories advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods. Next definition. A system of society or group living in which there is no private property. Next definition. A system or condition of society in which the means of production are owned and controlled by the state. And final definition, a stage of society in Marxist theory transitional between capitalism and communism and distinguished by unequal distribution of goods and pay according to work done. All right. So basically then, the biggest difference between this and capitalism is no private property. All right, so let's get to the definition of communism next, and you'll hear a lot of overlap here. First definition, a theory advocating elimination of private property. Next definition, a system in which goods are owned in common and are available to all as needed. Now, next definition. A doctrine based on revolutionary Marxian socialism and Marxism-Leninism that was the official ideology of the Soviet Union. Next definition. A totalitarian system of government in which a single authoritarian party controls state-owned means of production. And by the way, that really, this definition of communism that I just read described the Soviet Union and North Korea, so forth. So let's read that one again. It really applies to those states. A totalitarian system of government in which a single authoritarian party controls state-owned means of production. And totalitarian means they just want to control every aspect of your being. For example, they didn't want to have anybody worshiping God because it competed with the state. Final definition of communism. A final stage of society in Marxist theory in which the state has withered away and economic goods are distributed equitably. So the advocates of socialism will always tell you that, hey, this is just share and share alike. Let's just share everything and everybody will get along just fine, right? Well, not exactly. That's not the way it turns out. let's just read through these definitions again, or just pick pieces of these definitions out, and I'll show you some problems with it. There's several problems with socialism, and I recommend the book Socialism, entitled Socialism by Ludwig von Mises. It's a rather detailed examination of socialism and some problems with it. Let's look at the definition here again, and I'll comment. No private property. That should be a red flag for anybody, because if you don't have private property, that means you have to be dependent on the state, if it's the state controlling everything. Whoever's controlling the means of production, in other words, everything, the food that you eat, the clothes that you wear, everything you need in life to survive, if you don't have private property, that means it has to be supplied by somebody else. That means you're totally dependent on the state. Now, does that sound like a state of freedom to you? No, that's why I'm on this subject, because it's totally 180 degrees away from libertarianism. Now, also with socialism, you have the calculation problem, what's called the calculation problem, and also the incentive problem. Now, the calculation problem is if you don't have markets, if you don't have free markets, where people who sell goods, people who own goods and want to sell them to other people, there's a market. So the price is determined by the market. How much is a hat worth? How much is a pair of shoes worth? Okay. If I'm a shoemaker, how many red shoes do I carry? What sizes do I carry? All those things are going to be determined by market. Because if you're selling shoes that are in a range that a lot of people wear, you're going to be selling a lot of those sizes, right? But size 13 and a half, you're not going to sell as many of those. And that's a signal to people that are making shoes to know how many of each one of those to make. What colors are popular? That's going to be determined by the market. So there's a lot of things about items that are determined by free markets that you just, how do you determine that if you're in a top-down controlled economy when you have people in government that are determining what the price of something should be? How do they know what the price should be? They don't. All right, now the next problem, and this is also in von Mises' book, is not only the calculation problem, but you also have the incentive problem. All right, if I'm going to work my can off, okay, and I'm just going to have to turn around and hand it to somebody else, then what's the incentive for me to work hard if I don't get to keep it? Oh yeah, let's just go out and work our tails off so we can give it to somebody else. You see that? So that's another major flaw with socialism, is that production, it kills production, because people are not going to be, it's just human nature, they're not going to work as hard if they don't get to keep it. All right. Now, another part of this definition, means of production are owned and controlled by the state. Controlled by the state. Well, gosh, let me grab the state here. That's an abstract concept, isn't it? You can't go touch the state. So some people in government are the ones that are actually going to control this. So you've created an elite class of people. You know, if socialism is, hey, we're all supposed to be equal and alike and sharing, that's not the way it's going to work out in practice, because once you give people the power to control other people's economies, their lives, then you've created another elite. All right? Now, those are just a few of the problems with socialism and communism. And we're going to work through some articles now that I've uncovered. By the way, this is recently marked the 100th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia that ushered in a multi-decade period of communism in the former Soviet Union. And one other thing on the definition here before I get into that article. This last definition for communism, it says, a final stage of society in Marxist theory in which the state has withered away and economic goods are distributed equitably, in other words, fairly. Well, gosh, who's going to decide what's fair? Again, it's going to be those people in the elite positions in government. All right? And Marxist theory, the state withers away. Now, Marx was either really stupid or he was not being intellectually honest when he said that the state would wither away at some point. That's garbage, and he knew it. So I think the guy was pretty smart. So I think he knew that was BS. But let me just tell you right now, the state has never withered away. Once you give people power and control, human nature, it's like being on a drug. Okay? It's like being on cocaine. Seriously. People with power. They've done these studies on primates, like on apes. And the more power in that group that the apes get, it changes the chemistry in their brains. It's like being high on a drug. So once you give these people the power, they're not just going to turn around at some point and say, okay, let's just abolish the government now. That's never happened in human history that I know of. So I think Mr. Marx was a little disingenuous with that part of his theory. But let's get on to a couple of these articles now. Our first one's entitled, on the subject, this came out about the anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. And it's entitled, Disaster in Red, the 100th anniversary of the Russian Socialist Revolution. And this came from the Mises.org website. And from the article, November 7, 2017 marks the 100th anniversary of the Russian Revolution in Russia, that the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia that happened on that date in November 1917, which led to the communist dictatorship of the proletariat and ushered in an epoch of totalitarian tyranny and mass murder both in Russia and in every other country where socialism was put into practice. All right. Historians estimate as many as 150 million people, if not more, and counting, by the way, because North Korea still exists, China still exists. 150 million people, if not more, innocent men, women, and children were killed in the name of building the collectivist utopia. And that was throughout the whole course of the Soviet Union. Well, also in China, Chairman Mao killed a whole lot of folks too. By the way, when the Bolsheviks ruthlessly took power from the Tsar, and in doing so killed a whole lot of folks, somebody asked Trotsky about it, and Trotsky said famously, If you're going to make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs. Back to the article. They were shot, tortured, worked, or starved to death in prison cells, in interrogation rooms, labor camps, or just in the places where they lived. Socialism in practice created a chamber of horrors in which the individual was reduced to a mere expendable cog in the wheel to serve the collective good, or made into enemies of the people to be eliminated as the prelude to building the bright, beautiful communist future. You see, because you're going against human nature, people naturally want to work and keep what they earn when they work. So in order to make this happen, you have to do it by force. Continuing. In the name of a quote-unquote classless society, again, I've told you there's going to be classes, but in the name of a classless society, communism created the most minute and granulated system of privilege, favor, and power, depending upon where the individual stood in the hierarchies of the Communist Party and the management of a vast central planning bureaucracy. And Marx thought this was just going to wither away. Really? He wasn't that stupid. Continuing. The Communist Party did all in their power to control and confine the minds of those over whom they ruled into narrow corridors of knowledge and belief so little, no doubt could arise that theirs was the best of all worlds and far more socially just and materially better than anything existing in the reactionary and corrupted capitalist parts of the globe. And I remember stories of people, that would defect from Russia, and they would go to like a store here in the United States, and they just could not believe all the choices, all the items, all the various items to choose from. Okay, continuing with the article now. The 19th century French classical liberal economist Paul Leroy-Beaulieu gave warning in his important work Collectivism, which was released in 1885. And he says, how can liberty exist in a society in which everyone would be an employee of the state, brigaded in squadrons from which there would be no escape, dependent upon, now this was before the Soviet Union, keep this in mind, long before. He's predicting basically what's going to happen. He says, no escape, dependent upon a system of official classification for promotion and for all the amenities of life. The employee, and all would be employees, he says, would be the slave, not of the state, which is merely an abstraction, but of the politicians who possess themselves of power. And this is the idea that I brought you forward. There's actually going to have to be some people in control here. So this idea of the state withering away, I didn't know Mr. Marx was an anarchist. All right. Now don't take my word about the evils of socialism. In the following video clips you will hear from a lady who once actually lived in the Soviet Union. So let's hear some of her comments now.
That in your childhood you thought of yourself as a Russian citizen, not as a Soviet citizen, not as a Ukrainian, whereas in the United States people have an identity based on Texas or where they're from, and that you felt that the Soviet Union would have discouraged any sort of Ukrainian nationalism.
Yes, they try. I think that's one of the things that they try to do is just kind of discourage all these 15 republics from keeping their identity, national identity, so everybody was a Soviet citizen. So they tried to equalize everybody. So we're all equal, we are all Soviet citizens. So there was no Ukrainian identity, Moldovan or Belarusian, so we are all the citizens of the Soviet Union. So I think in that way they kind of try to keep the masses under control, I guess,
Okay.
so that you don't identify with something else, so you're all citizens of the Soviet Union.
Growing up, what were your conceptions of capitalism, and did you consider your economy communist, or did you have another conception of it?
The conceptions that we had primarily came from textbooks and the stories they were telling us, which means brainwashing us.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, when it was getting close to the collapse of the Soviet Union, when some Americans were brave enough to come, and since I spoke fluent English at that time, I spoke to some just people, American people, and I figured out very quickly, so all the stories we were told were very untrue. Like little kids, slaving around, working in sweatshops. That was the main thing that was in every textbook. In elementary school, so the stories of evil capitalists, enslaving little children. And the main, I think, propaganda was that we were so lucky because we got to go to school and get education. And then, in the evil capitalist world, children did not have this opportunity that we had. So instead they had to work 12 hours a day. And there was this cartoons of children slaving around in sweatshops. So also pictures of homeless people on the street, people starving. And I just wanted to, speak, I guess, English with someone, with a native speaker. And so we started talking to him a little bit, and he was just telling me, I asked him about sweatshops and little kids, having to work when they were 8 or 9 years old. And he's like, there is nothing like that, Liliana. It's not true. So that was my first kind of shock.
Okay.
So I think I figured out that everything we were told was not true. So that was all propaganda. And then, of course, later on, when I met more people from Europe and also American, I figured out more and more that how brainwashed we were. We had food and we had shelter. We lived in ugly, government-built apartments. So we had an apartment to live in, and we had basic food. So basic needs were satisfied. So we didn't realize that, I guess, we were deprived of many other opportunities. So when you kind of live in this bubble, you don't know how things are outside of it. You don't even realize how bad you have it. When I started hanging out with American people, that's when I realized how messed up our system was, and that we were brainwashed, and 90% of things we were told about the Western world were not true, were just lies. They would ask questions like, why couldn't you have any anesthetic? I said, because the government decided who gets anesthetic. They were rationed, and only people got painkillers and anesthetics for major surgeries like heart surgeries, abdominal surgeries. There was no painkillers used in dental care whatsoever in the Soviet Union. I'm not surprised at all, because they think that, someone else should take care of their problem. Someone else should make decisions for them. Hospitals, Sweden, UK, awful. You get any serious problems, you cannot see a specialist. There's long lines, you come, you waste all your day to see a doctor, and then you cannot see anybody. And then the quality of care you get is just not... It's not the same as you get in the United States, for example. So I think in many cases when people say, oh, we would like socialism, they just don't really know what that system means and what it's going to mean in terms of, their lifestyle. System. I was I tried so hard to go overseas to get away from this whole system. And it's really scary to me that, it may all come here, that becoming so popular here.
This topic ran in a little longer than I thought it would, so we're going to have to split it into 2 episodes. And we'll continue and finish it in the next episode. I want to thank you again for joining us for another edition of Liberty Watch. And be sure to tell a friend about us. And join us next time on Liberty Watch, where we don't believe you need some guy with a bullhorn to tell you what to do.